I travel for work from time to time. Typically, it's about 2 or 3 times a year. We will have different conferences and things like that in major cities around the US. It usually is just a few days, and the company pays for it, which is nice. The hotels are usually pretty good, and we have a little bit of time to explore the cities as well. So a couple of years ago, I was traveling to Cleveland. As far as travel, I was on my own, as only a few people from our office went and the others left a day before me. That's because they were higher ups. But anyways, I got to the airport and went through security and everything. I was in the waiting area and still had some time before the flight, so I decided to walk around. I went to get something to drink and also to see what the options were. There were a lot of other people walking around as it was a weekday morning at around 7 a.m. At one point though, while walking, I saw this guy and thought that he was filming me. I'm telling you, I'm not a paranoid person, but this guy had his phone in a way that seemed like he was trying to film me. And it didn't look obvious, but also not the most secret either. At first, I thought that it just appeared that way, but as I kept walking, I noticed that he kind of continued to walk with me. He was probably about 20 feet away. I honestly don't know how I noticed him so well, but I'm glad that I did. So I went in one of those little shops and looked around there. I noticed that this guy went there as well. He stood outside though and pretended to look at something. He would put his phone up and then down again. He never looked at me, but his phone pointed in my direction a lot. It was really strange. I started looking in his direction more and more. Eventually, he walked off. I was glad that he was gone, and I went back to wait for my flight after getting some coffee. When I arrived back and sat down, I nearly buried my face in my hands when I saw the same guy sitting in the area. He wasn't filming me like before, but was just sitting there, and he appeared to now be talking on the phone. It seemed as though he would be on my flight, because he was waiting in the same area. He wasn't sitting that close to me, but a ways away, and we still had about another hour until boarding time. So I tried to just relax and I went on my phone. I looked up every now and again, and I noticed the man look at me a couple of times. I did not know what his problem was. Finally, when it came time to board the plane, I looked over to where the guy was. He boarded before me and appeared to be talking on his cell phone the whole time. When I got on the plane, I was thankfully not sitting anywhere near him. The flight lasted a few hours and then we landed in the city. After getting off the plane, I went and got my luggage and then I started heading to the front of the airport to leave. But before I made it out of the baggage claim area, I saw a guy holding a sign with my name on it. It was my first and last name and I was very confused. I'd never got that before. I went up to the man and asked him who the sign was for, thinking maybe somebody else happened to have my same name. He said that it was for me. My name is not that common, so I was confused. He said that he was with a car service that was there to drive me. I almost went with him, but something just seemed off. I was not told anything about this, and in all the other company trips we were not provided with a car service. We had to call taxis or Ubers for ourselves, so I didn't know what was going on. Then I looked over and I saw that same guy from before who had been filming me. He was looking at me standing about 20 feet away. I needed to verify that this was a car service for me. I told the guy with the sign that I would be right back and I just had to use the restroom. He said okay and I walked away and went into the nearest restroom. As I was in there, I called my company. I learned that there was not supposed to be any guy there with a sign. There was no car service for us. The whole situation was now really freaking me out. So I left the bathroom and walked another way and left out of a different exit to the airport. I walked down a sidewalk and called a taxi there. Then I was able to make it to the hotel. I never saw those guys again. I'm not sure what was going on there, but it was really fishy. I had a really creepy experience at the airport a few years ago. So I was waiting to board my flight and I was sitting down reading a book. There was probably about an hour or so until boarding time. I was traveling by myself, going back home from visiting my best friend, Allie. We had been best friends since we were very young, and she lived a few states away from me for work at the time. She has since moved back, but we visited each other a few times when we lived far apart. So as I was waiting there, I remembered that this guy came up and sat down right next to me. The airport was busy, but not that busy. There were still plenty of other places for this guy to sit that were not right next to me, or next to anybody for that matter. It seemed a little weird for him to sit down in that spot. However, when he sat down, he did not say hi or anything. He didn't even look at me. He just sat down and started pretty much just staring straight ahead. The man was maybe in his 30s, wore dark clothing, and had a hat with sunglasses. He seemed to have a very serious look on his face, or at least what I could see of his face minus the hat and sunglasses. I just ignored him and continued reading my book. As the time went by, it felt more and more awkward. The guy did not get up once, and he just kept sitting there staring straight ahead. But for the most part, I was able to drown it out with reading. Finally, it was time to board the plane. I was more than happy to get up as soon as I heard that we were boarding now. The man got up right after me. He still didn't say anything. I moved ahead of him and got on the plane and to my seat, which was a window seat. Then, a short time later, I saw the man come and sit right next to me again. I couldn't believe it. This guy apparently had the seat right next to mine. Once more, he sat down and stared straight ahead, looking very serious, and didn't say anything to me or even look at me. The flight was only 2 hours, but it felt like it was going to seem much longer now. Soon we took off. The man was sitting in the seat next to me, but the seat next to that, which was an aisle seat, was empty. The flight was not completely full, and there were a number of open seats. This guy could have easily moved over to the aisle seat, giving us both more space. But no, he instead stayed sitting right next to me. I put on headphones and tried to sleep for the whole flight. So I wasn't bothered or anything, but every now and then I would open my eyes to see the guy in the exact same position. It was really weird. Eventually, finally, the plane landed. After we had landed and the plane came to a stop, the man finally spoke. He turned to me and looked at me right in the face and said, "See you later tonight." Then he stood up and walked away. Now, we were in like the 10th or 15th row of the plane, something like that, and the plane had just stopped, so you're supposed to let the people in front of you get off first. The guy broke every rule in the book, budging in front of multiple people and squeezing through the crowd. He disappeared out of my sight and seemed to be in a hurry to get off the plane, as I waited in my row to leave like a normal person. I was so confused as to why this man said that. I did not want to see him tonight at all. I had no idea who he was, and he shouldn't know who I am either. Eventually, I got off the plane and did not see the guy anywhere at all, which I was more than happy about. After getting off the plane and back into the airport, I called my friend Audrey, who was picking me up. She was already on her way, and I had texted her when we took off and landed. I didn't have to get a bag or anything, so I walked straight for the exit where Audrey was parked waiting for me. In the time that I walked out there, I didn't see the weird guy at all. I got in the car and Audrey drove me back to my apartment and dropped me off. I told her about the weird guy on the drive and she agreed that it was very strange. So after getting back, I should mention that it was only the early afternoon. I didn't have anything going on that day, so I just unpacked, cleaned my place, and then went to the gym. By the nighttime, I had forgotten all about the weird guy. However, that night when I was home by myself in my apartment, there was a knock on the door at about 10 o'clock. At first, I had no idea who it could be, but then I remembered the guy. I quietly walked over to the door and looked through the peephole. There he was, standing right on the other side. I have no idea how he found me or knew where I lived. I ran away from the door and didn't know what to do. I was freaking out and felt like I was in danger. I heard him knock again, but I just ran into my bedroom and closed the door. I didn't come out for a while. When I was in there, I did not hear any more knocking. Eventually, I decided to go back out. I went to the door and looked again. He was now gone. I was really creeped out though. It took a long time for me to fall asleep that night. Since that night though, I never saw the man again. When I fly, I use a parking lot a few miles from the airport to park in, and then I take a shuttle to and from the airport. This is cheaper than the parking at the airport, and I can also still drive there and don't have to rely on my friends to pick me up or drop me off. And I fly kind of a lot for work, so this is something that saves me a lot of money. One time in particular though, I was coming back from a work trip. I had worked very hard and had a long day. I was so happy to finally fly back home. It was about a 3-hour flight, and it was also really late at night, so I slept most of the way on the plane. I remember waking up at around landing time and being very groggy. I couldn't wait to get home and sleep in my comfortable bed. After getting off the plane, I went and got my bag. It was about 2 a.m. and I was so tired. I still probably wasn't fully awake, but I went through the motions of getting my bag and then walking to the shuttle area. So the area you would get picked up in was right outside the doors. The shuttle vans would go to the airport about every 15 minutes, so I didn't have to call anybody. All I had to do was wait. By now the airport was quiet, but with the flight having just landed, there were a few other people and cars around. I waited on the sidewalk and saw a large black van pulling up. It was a good sight to see. I was standing kind of by myself, and the van pulled up and stopped right in front of me. I opened the side door and got in, greeting the driver, who said hi to me. Then he began driving, and I tried to wake up fully so that I would be able to drive home when I got back to the lot. The parking lot where my car was in a giant garage and a few miles from the airport. It was usually like a 5 to 10 minute drive from the airport depending on traffic. So I sat back and relaxed as we drove out of the airport and onto the nearby streets. I checked my phone a little and looked back at the streets. The ride continued, but soon it seemed to be going for too long. We were driving for like 15 minutes. In this time, not me or the driver said a single word. I did not know if it was taking longer than usual for some reason or something else. I thought maybe there was road construction and we had to take a longer route or something, because there was not really much traffic. Soon though, we began driving down these roads that I knew were in the wrong direction. We were going faster and farther away. I really had no idea where we even were anymore. So finally, I spoke. I asked the driver where we were going. He said that he was taking me home. I told him that I was supposed to go to the parking garage. He said no, he was driving me home. I had a really bad feeling now. I asked him if he even worked for that parking garage, and he said no. So apparently I had gotten into the completely wrong vehicle. I asked him to just stop and let me out. He first said no, that we were not there yet. When we came to a stop at a red light though, I got up, took my bags, and went to the door. I just opened it and then left. He looked back, and I just said that I had to go and was leaving. He didn't try to stop me or anything, and I got right out. I walked down the quiet street at the crazy hour that it was and called an Uber. The van I was in drove off, and I waited there until the Uber picked me up. Then I got a ride to the parking garage, got my car, went home, and went to bed. To this day, I have no idea whose van I got into or where we were going. Did the driver think that I was somebody else? He must have, because he seemed to know where he was going, and he claimed to be taking me home, but he never once asked me where I lived or where I was going. Either that, or maybe he was taking me to his home. I'd like to think that it was the first option. This happened a couple of years ago. I went to the airport late one night to pick up a friend. Her flight was supposed to land at like 11 p.m. or something like that. It was pretty late, so when I left my apartment and drove there, the streets were empty. I made great time and parked outside of the doors and waited. However, when tracking the flight on my phone, I realized that I was quite early. There would still be about 30 more minutes before the flight landed. And then after that, it would be who knows how long before my friend got off the plane and out of the airport. So I decided to go and park in a nearby lot and walk around inside the airport. It was really quiet now, and I always like walking around airports because they have a fun feel. So I parked and then walked inside. I was going to maybe get a coffee or an energy drink or something. As I walked around, I saw a few people here and there, but not too many. A mixture of people probably waiting for flights to land and others boarding overnight flights. The rest of the people I saw were airport employees. After walking around for some time though, I thought this one woman started following me, because as I casually was walking around, at one point I turned around to go back another way. I saw this woman walking towards me now. Then, as I walked the opposite way, I turned and saw her now walking the opposite way as well. It seemed odd, but as I continued to walk through the airport, I noticed that she remained behind me. The woman had light-colored hair and was wearing a hat. She was also wearing a sweatshirt and sweatpants. I didn't know who she was. As I kept walking around, I was basically just wandering through the airport. I stopped at one point to look at the flights and to see when my friend would be landing. By now, the flight would be landing within 10 minutes. The lady was kind of standing around near where I was. I decided to head back to my car now and drive around to pick up my friend, and also because the lady was kind of creeping me out. Her overall appearance and behavior just came across as strange and suspicious to me. So I started to walk towards the exits. I remember noticing the woman start to walk behind me. At that point, I went faster, left the airport, and quickly walked for the parking lot that my car was in, which was a little ways. It was probably like a 5-minute walk, but I didn't notice the lady following me as I went to my car. So I got inside and then waited for a text from my friend. When the flight landed, she texted me, and then I got ready to drive around to the pickup spot. So I waited a couple of minutes and then drove there and parallel parked near the other cars. Within a few minutes, my friend came out and got into the car. Then we started driving away. I was dropping her off at her place and then going back home to mine. By now it was almost midnight, so once we got away from the airport and out of the city, the roads were basically empty. However, one car remained behind us. I didn't think much of it at first until we exited the highway. The car did as well. As I drove down more quiet roads now, it was just the two of us out there. I noticed the car but still wasn't alarmed. However, after turning onto a much quieter street to get to my friend's apartment complex, the car was still there. I was now a little suspicious but could not see who was driving. Soon we arrived and I pulled over and dropped off my friend. The crazy thing is that the car behind us pulled over as well, but a ways back. My friend got out and soon entered her apartment building. I looked behind me but saw no one get out of the car parallel parked behind me, but I could now sort of see into the car to the driver's seat, and I realized that the same woman appeared to be behind the wheel, the one who was following me earlier at the airport. Now I was very freaked out. I instantly drove away from there and she followed me. I remembered then to go to a police station when being followed, and I did just that. She stopped following me before the turn for the police. After that, I did not report her but drove back home, checking my mirrors the entire time. I never saw that lady again, but I still don't know why she chose to follow me. The craziest experience that I had at an airport took place almost 5 years ago now. I had just gotten off a flight from Pittsburgh. I was back home and had traveled by myself. My friend was coming to pick me up at the airport and was on his way. So after getting off the flight, me and a bunch of other people headed to pick up our bags. It was nighttime, maybe 10 o'clock. When I got to the baggage claim, I stood around and waited. Eventually, I saw my bag. It was a pretty average-looking suitcase that was dark gray in color. I went over, picked it up, and then started wheeling it towards the doors. I checked my phone and confirmed where my friend was waiting in the car to pick me up. It was a little bit of a walk from there, but it was not a big deal. When I had made it a ways away and I was approaching the doors to leave, I felt someone grab my shoulder. And not tap me on the shoulder, but grab me. I turned around and saw this guy standing there with an angry look on his face. He was a kind of short and small guy, but he seemed to have a large amount of anger. Instantly, he said that I took his bag. Then he reached for my suitcase. I knew that this was my bag, but for a moment I wondered if I had accidentally grabbed the wrong one. Maybe this guy had the same exact bag as me. The guy did not have a bag with him, so if he did, he certainly didn't take mine. He instantly was accusing me of trying to rob him. The whole thing really took me by surprise. Finally, I said, "Calm down, buddy, I'm sure this is my bag." He was basically trying to grab it from me, but I didn't let him. I said I would prove it, and I took the suitcase and then opened it. I was relieved when I saw my own clothes inside, as well as a couple of my personal items. I told the man that he must be mistaken, and maybe his bag just looked similar. Unbelievably though, the man still seemed to think that this was his bag. He told me that I just put my stuff in there to make it look like it was mine. Now, I knew that this guy was just off the rails at this point, so I turned and decided to leave. But he grabbed my shoulder again. I asked him what he wanted me to do, and he said for me to give him the bag. I said that it was mine and I was not going to do that, and we could go to the security right now and prove it if he wants. Interestingly enough though, the man didn't want to do that. He told me to just give him the bag and we could both leave, and we didn't need to go to security. But I didn't give him the bag. I told the guy if he was missing his bag to check the baggage claim again or take it up with the airline. The man seemed to finally cool off a little. So I turned and started walking for the doors. At first the man stood there and stayed where he was. Once I had made it out of the doors though, he seemed to change his mind. I saw him storming for the doors. I quickly hurried up and located my friend's car outside. I walked as quickly as I could and just opened his back door and jumped in with my bag. I closed the door and told him to just drive. He was confused though and didn't know what was going on. Soon the angry man reached my friend's car. He tried opening the door, but I had hit the lock button just in time. Then he started banging on the door. My friend finally got the idea and drove away. We made it back all right, but I still can't believe how angry that guy was when it wasn't even his bag to begin with. I started my new job at the airport. And I say new job, but I was just moved to a different airline and was working the same ramp agent position. Funny enough, I have a crippling fear of heights, and my least favorite part of being a ramp agent is when I must climb into the cargo bin on a rear-loading plane, because it's about 20 feet above the ground. This night was a strange mix of a few factors which created an uneasy feeling. The first condition is it was raining. Not just lightly raining, but pouring rain with a few scattering lightning flashes and thunder. Also, every now and then, we'd have dead bodies transported in a coffin box in the cargo bins. This was one of those occasions, and tonight was my lucky night apparently, because my manager told me I was throwing this plane. That meant that I would be pulling the cargo out of the bin. It was the last plane for the night, and there wasn't very much cargo besides the body. My coworker, who I will call John, pulled the ramp loader to the plane and raised it up so I could walk up the conveyor belt to enter the bin. About 4 other coworkers came over with a baggage tug for the cargo. Before we went in, I yelled out to everyone in a louder than normal tone because the rain was loudly smacking the metal shell of the airplane. I said, "I hope y'all are ready, I'm not trying to be in there all night." John laughed and said something like, "Don't worry about it, maybe you can make a new friend in there," in reference to the body that would be lying up there. I didn't think it was funny, but I chuckled and said let's get going. I climbed into the small and cramped space and sat the bin as far from the human-sized white box as I could. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and selected a playlist to listen to while I threw the bin. I found a good one and started working. The conveyor belt moved at a snail's pace, and I had to wait until they scanned each individual package, so I couldn't just throw them as fast as I wanted to and get out of there. About 10 minutes in, I was getting closer to the dead body box and my music stopped playing. I've had earbuds that short out when they get wet, so that was in the front of my mind, and I automatically assumed that the rain somehow got in them, and I just needed to shake a bit of water out of them, but they were bone dry. I checked Spotify to see if it was a glitch or was a problem with the app, and I saw that I had an unread text. Did I get the notification and not hear it while listening to my music? The way my phone is set up is when I get a message, it will tell me who it's from, but it won't display the message. I needed to open the app to read it. The message was from an unknown number, which was odd, because very few people have my number to begin with. I clicked the notification to read the message, and all it said was hi. I sent a text back saying, "Hey, who's this?" My phone displayed that whoever sent me the message saw mine immediately after I sent it. I waited and got no response. I started my playlist back up and got back to my job. Shortly after, there was a crash of thunder, and it was so loud that the plane shook and it made me jump at first, but I quickly rationalized it and returned to work. I noticed the conveyor belt was no longer moving, so I yelled to John, "What's going on out there? Why did it stop?" John replied that it had ran out of gas and that they would need to get another loader and they would be back in a bit, so I just had to sit tight up there and wait. About 1 minute later, it got cold, like I could see my breath cold. I wrote it off as just a cold front and reached over for some stranger's luggage to lean on while I waited. As I looked over for a bag to grab, lightning went across the sky and I saw a quick flash of a little boy, maybe 11 or 12 years old, sitting on the white box staring at me with this eerily happy smile and his head turned slightly to the side. My heart sank and I froze, never taking my eyes off the box for what felt like hours, but it was probably less than 10 minutes. I was startled by the replacement conveyor belt starting up right next to the plane. I darted over to the moving conveyor, crawling as fast as I could, trying to keep my balance all the way down to the ground. I hit the ground and looked at John and said, "Nope, I'm done. You're gonna have to go in there." I didn't want to explain exactly what I saw, but John knew something scared me bad. I didn't want to scare him since he was about to head up there and take my spot, so I walked away before I could say anything. Then I got a new text message notification that I heard loud and clear this time, a response from that same unknown sender which said, "It's your new friend." This happened a while ago. I'm a youth transport agent and travel a lot because of it. Basically, parents pay me and one of my coworkers to escort their teenage children to a program of their choice for troubled youth. My job is to make sure that they get from point A to point B as safely as possible. This trip had us fly into the Las Vegas airport. We were getting on the tram that would take us to the terminal for baggage claim and the parking garage. As we got onto the tram, a young man in his early 20s wearing name-brand clothing and good-looking got into the same car as us and immediately started talking to the 15-year-old I was escorting. While they were talking, I was closely monitoring the situation, and the first thing I noticed after his age and attire was that he had no baggage. Nothing at all. No backpack, briefcase, nothing to indicate that he had just gotten off of a flight. Not only that, but he was asking her some very personal questions, like where she's from, who she's with, how long she was going to be in town, if anybody she knew was there, that kind of thing. At that point, I stepped into the conversation and made sure that he had to keep his attention on me, not the youth woman I was with. This seemed to upset him a little bit, and he kept trying to direct his questions to her, and I would answer before she could. I kept throwing glances at my partner and could tell that she was also concerned. See, Las Vegas is a pretty well-known area for human trafficking. Inside the airport bathrooms are signs telling you who to contact if you're being trafficked. It's that big of a concern. I was convinced that this guy was trying to steal the child away from us. We stayed glued to the girl the second the tram stopped. We didn't have any luggage to pick up. It was all carry-on, so we weren't following the large group of people heading down the escalators towards the baggage claim. Instead, we cut off to head towards the parking garage where our rental car was parked. At first, the young man looked like he was going to try to go down towards the baggage claim with the crowd, but at the last minute, when he noticed we weren't going that way, he cut out of the crowd and continued to follow us. At that point, my partner and I had been silently communicating, and we were both on the same page. This dude was sketchy. We told the young lady we were escorting to stay as close to us as possible until we got to the rental car. This guy followed us all the way to the elevators. After my group got on, I turned to him and told him that he was not getting on this elevator. He needed to wait for the next one. Before the door closed, he was on the staircase running up the stairs. By the time he got to our floor, we were already halfway to the car. He tried to follow us again, but I silently let my partner know to keep going while I stayed behind. I turned to him again and told him that I knew what he was doing and that my partner was calling the cops, and he hightailed it out of there at that point. We did end up calling the police, but we couldn't stay for a statement because we were already headed out of the state. After giving the statement over the phone, the police agreed that it sounded like he was attempting to human traffic the teen that we were escorting. The young woman had no idea what was going on until we were driving off, and she asked why we were being so weird. I'm so glad that we were paying attention, because I'm almost certain that guy was trying his hardest to take that little girl. A few years ago, I was traveling around in South America with one of my best friends and his group of friends. It was the last day before going back to our country. My friend and I arrived the night prior and wanted to visit the city before taking the plane in the evening. Because we had so little time, we did not have lunch and just went straight to the airport after our city adventure. We arrived at the airport a bit early and got back with the whole group. I had met them during the trip, but being quite shy, I was not very close with any one of them. We got through the gate and into the small space where our flight gate was. With 2 hours before the flight boarded, my friend and I decided to go look for a place to eat. I had 3 bags with me, a hat box, a backpack, and a fanny pack. I left the first 2 with the group, telling them to look after them. Because we were such a large group, there was a pile of other bags around them from other members that had left them there. We went and ate. Our gate opened and travelers started to line up. We went back to the group to get our bags. I got my hat box, but my backpack had disappeared. People were slowly going through the gates, and I started panicking. The group separated. With my friend, we were running up to every place, and I was asking them if they had seen my blue backpack. No one had seen it. The minutes were flying by, and the closing time of the gate came closer. Finally, an airport security guy came up to help us. However, with my small Spanish vocabulary, it was hard to get my point across. A stewardess came to my help, informing me at the same time that the flight was closing soon and I had to decide. Either stay and maybe find my backpack or go into the flight. In this backpack, I had my sketchbook that I had drawn in during the whole trip, a teddy bear that was precious to my heart, my phone, and my tablet. Losing those objects was a hard-to-swallow pill, and the weariness of the trip did not help. Fortunately, I had kept my boarding pass and my passport in my pouch. We went on the flight. I was angry at myself and at the group for not having paid attention to it. The flight attendant was touched by my little story and took great care of me. I got seated next to a friendly man, and even though my emotions were all over the place, he calmed me down and I slowly started to relax. I was in the back of the plane in economy. The flight was 10+ hours and the seats were cramped. At one point, I walked around the airplane to stretch and move around a bit. As I left my seat, I saw my seat neighbor directly behind me. He looked like a grumpy old man. When I walked past him, I could smell alcohol on him, and the floor was wet from a possible spilled drink. He was that kind of flight neighbor that you hate in silence. I got back to my seat, and eventually I put a movie on. He started getting agitated and slamming his little table into the back of my seat. He must have been struggling to close it. As the hours flew by, I was happy to almost be back home, but my lost backpack was still on my mind. I was more annoyed by losing all those precious photos and drawings that I had made than the replaceable phone and tablet. The probability of maybe seeing them again was low, but weirdly I was at peace with it. The airplane was approaching its destination. Once on the ground, one of the nice stewardess came up to me. She quietly asked me to stay behind for a few moments after everyone had left. The rush came back, and I was even more stressed as to what I might have to deal with now. I stayed behind, and slowly but surely I became the only passenger still on the flight. The stewardess came back, smiled, and asked me to follow her. She grabbed a white plastic bag on a seat and gave it to me. I opened it. My sketchbook was in it. I could not believe it. However, my electronics were still missing, and even more surprisingly, my precious teddy bear. She looked at me and told me that I was quite lucky, but I still have to wait a bit more. I saw a commotion at the front of the flight. Some policemen had entered the plane and were talking. One of them asked me to give him my phone and tablet PIN code. I wrote them down and gave it to him. He walked to the front of the aircraft. He then asked me to describe the tablet. There are very visible stickers on the back of it, which I described to him. I was then asked to come to the front of the plane to identify my stuff, as another passenger was strongly claiming that it was his. The policeman led me to the first class section at the front of the plane. There I was, face to face with the grumpy old man who had been sitting behind me. He had rage-filled little eyes. He looked at me as if I were the one who stole his bag. He was surrounded by 2 tall officers. An airport manager next to me handed me my phone and asked me to put the code in. It unlocked. The old man stared at me, his face tensed with anger. He was wearing a white shirt and light brown pants. His stature was frail, and any other time I would have probably smiled nicely at him. It was weird to see him destroy his chance to travel for a small backpack. At some point, the video surveillance of theft at the airport was sent to the aircraft, and they recognized the old man. I know that I'm incredibly lucky to have retrieved my items, and I'm thankful to the aircraft team. Last year, I was traveling home from South Africa. When I finally arrived at my connecting airport, I was exhausted from the 11-hour flight. Due to the way my connecting flight was, I had to pick up my bags and re-drop them. So after that, I had about a 5-hour wait before my next flight. I went through security a little flustered, as this was my first time traveling completely alone. After I got through security, I went to the airport showers. There was this older man standing outside the showers. I thought this a little odd because the showers were a little bit farther away from the rest of the gates and restaurant area. I just assumed that he was waiting for someone, until he stared and smiled at me entering the women's section. Something about the smile made me move faster. He wasn't there when I came out of the bathroom though. Thinking no more of it, I went to get some food. The line was long, so I decided to call my mom. We chatted for ages when I realized somebody was standing way too close to me. If it weren't for my backpack, I'm sure this person would be right against my back. I probably don't need to tell you who it was, but it was the old guy from earlier from near the showers. Without making it look obvious, I took a step back, which pushed him away. Acting innocent, I turned and apologized, and that's when he smiled at me again. This time I smelt his breath, which was beyond foul, and he just radiated a sweaty smell. In what I think was French, he said something to me which I didn't understand. The line moved forward, and I ordered, paid, and waited for my sandwich and drink. When my name was called, I stepped forward, and just when I went to take my things, he took them for me and said in English this time, "A sweet dear like you shouldn't have to carry things." I quickly grabbed them from him and walked away as fast as I could and sat on the benches. He sat down across from me and put his hand on my knee. I got up and moved, and he sat next to me again, this time with one arm around my shoulders. I got up again, but this time I used my vague intelligence, which I hadn't bothered to use before. I went to the flight help desk, which brought me to the police. They asked me to show them who the man was, but by this time he had disappeared. They told me not to worry and to sit near the help desk. Later on, the police escorted me to the plane, and I finally made it home safe. I never saw that man again. This story happened about 5 years ago, back when I was still driving for Uber. I was driving back to Dallas after dropping a passenger off. It was a long trip, and I was happy to make such a large amount of money for such a long trip. But I really wasn't expecting to make anything on the way back. It's a risk you take when you drive for Uber. You might end up just having to drive all the way back with no passenger. Nevertheless, I kept the app on just in case I got a ride. Uber allowed a driver to set their destination and only accept rides that are along the route or that you get closer to your destination. About 20 minutes into my drive back, much to my surprise, I suddenly got a ping to pick up a woman named Sarah from a smaller town on the way back into Dallas. I went to pick up the passenger and discovered that it was a young lady who appeared to be 18 to 22 years old. The pickup spot was in front of the small city's town hall. That was kind of weird because it was Sunday and the whole town was basically closed. The young lady was standing on the curb in front of the city hall, with no one else around her as far as the eyes could see. There were no houses or buildings or anything. She was standing there by herself, wearing a t-shirt and blue jean shorts and holding a duffel bag. The young lady got in the car, and I confirmed that she was Sarah. Her destination was the airport. I confirmed the destination and set off to drop her there. When we got to the airport, I quickly noticed that the map was directing me to the corporate headquarters of the airport and not to an actual gate. I asked Sarah if she had the terminal, airline, and gate information. She said, "Oh, any one of them." I said, "Ma'am, what airline? What terminal? Do you have your reservations?" She said, "Oh, it doesn't matter. I haven't bought my ticket yet." I went back and forth with her for a bit and how I needed a specific place to drop her off, as the airport was huge. There were dozens of airlines and about 6 terminals. She was getting irritated, and so was I. Out of nowhere, she pulled up a small knife and held it up to me and told me to stop the car now and just let her out. I was shocked by how quick me trying to help her get where she needed escalated. I complied obviously and stopped immediately. Then she ended up hopping out of my car close to one of the hotel airports that has an entry inside the airport. She got out and walked off towards there. Perplexed by the weirdness of the ordeal, on the way out I flagged down an airport police officer and told him the whole story and told him where I dropped her. He said he would check it out. I went about my night like normal and never heard anything on the news about her, so I really have no idea what ended up happening or why she acted like she did in my car, but it was very weird.